Hello, everyone. I wanted to take a very quick look at the Nagel review questions. Number one, according to Nagel, life is a good and death is bad. But in what sense is death's badness different from life's goodness? That is a pretty simple point, but one that's actually quite important for his argument, I think. This is at the bottom, page 74. He says, if we turn from what is good about life to what is bad about death, the case is completely different. Essentially, though there may be problems about their specification, what we find desirable in life are certain states, conditions, or types of activity. It is being alive, doing certain things, having certain experiences that we consider good. So the goodness of life consists in being alive and all the things that go along with being alive. He continues and says, but if death is an evil, it is the loss of life rather than the state of being dead or non-existent or unconscious that is objectionable. So that's an important point. That is that the goodness of life consists in being alive, but the badness of death does not consist in merely being dead. The state of being dead is not necessarily bad. The badness of death consists in the loss of goods, the loss of life. So we might say that obviously allowing for unhappiness and suffering, but that it's being alive is intrinsically good, whereas being dead is not intrinsically bad. It's the loss of goods that goes along with being dead that makes it bad. Number two, Nagel suggests that the key to understanding in what sense death is an evil or bad for the one who died is time. How so? That's a difficult question. I'd say that's a difficult point. Let me see if I can find. He says it. Yes, it's right here on page 76. All the questions have something to do with time. There certainly are goods and evils of a simple kind, including some pleasures and pains, which a person possesses at a given time simply in virtue of his condition at that time. But this is not true of all the things we regard as good or bad for a man. Often we need to know his history to tell whether something is a misfortune or not. Well, interesting. And this goes right to his problem with Epicurus, right? That Epicurus thought that all bad things for a person had to do with feeling bad, experiencing suffering. And that would be what he calls the evils of a simple kind. Like getting punched in the face is bad. Why? Because it hurts. So are all bad things for a person like that? Nagel says no. Sometimes you have to take into consideration the person's history. Let's say that right now I have an IQ of 120. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You can be a perfectly, it's good. 120. Yeah, man. I don't know what my IQ is, but say I have an IQ of 120. In itself, that is not a bad thing. I mean, I wouldn't say that's a bad thing, but what if yesterday I had an IQ of 160? And then overnight I had some kind of accident or stroke well, then my having an IQ of 120, well, that has a different flavor. That is, if we know that there are two people, both of whom have IQs of 120, that's not all we would need to know whether that was a good or bad thing for them or a neutral thing. If we knew that one of them yesterday had an IQ of 100 and it jumped 20 points so that they can do more math, I don't know, and remember more poetry, it's good for them. But if somebody else had an IQ yesterday of 160, so you kind of get what I mean in this idea of history and time, is that you have to sort of regard somebody's life, the events of their life in context to determine whether it's a good or bad for them, not just whether it hurts or feels good at the time. This is, of course, very important when it comes to number 5. So it's also important in number 3. Nagel denies the old saying that what you don't know can't hurt you. Why? Well, first of all, to note that he does believe that. That is, he believes that's wrong, right? That is, Nagel does not believe that what's in the quotes there is true. He believes it's false. There's plenty of things that you don't know that can hurt you. And he believes that betrayals, deceptions, deprivations fit into that category of things where you don't have to be aware of something to have it be a bad for you, which is directly a contradiction of one of Epicurus's main points. Why? Well, if you take into consideration somebody's history, it becomes obvious why. Let's take a look at number 5, where Nagel suggests a hypothetical with a man who has a brain injury. How does this hypothetical help Nagel make his main point about the badness of death? In that hypothetical, the man who has had the brain injury is not aware of his loss of function, and his mental state is identical to the mental state of a contented infant. He doesn't know what his losses are. So from the Epicurean point of view, it would seem that you couldn't say that a bad thing had happened to him because he's not aware of it. But Nagel thinks that that's patently absurd, that we pity such a person who has experienced a loss of function, whether they're aware of the loss or not. That person has been hurt, even though they're not experiencing any suffering. It's an important point. And just to end up that, or to finish off that question, how does this hypothetical help Nagel make his point about the badness of death? Well, it's important to note the whole point of that hypothetical about the man with the brain injury is that he is more or less like the dead. That is, he has had a loss, but he's not aware of the loss. Just as the dead have had a loss, the loss of everything in life, they're not aware of the loss because they don't exist anymore. So the man, who clearly still exists, has had this devastating loss of which he's not aware. And Nagel's whole point is that it's a bad for him whether he knows it or not. And so death is bad for the one who dies, whether he knows it or not. But is death always bad for the one who dies? Well, maybe. Number 4 says, according to Nagel, if someone dies at 806 years old, has something bad happened to them? Why or why not? I believe that the answer to that is yes. That is, Nagel does believe that something bad has happened to them. And it goes with the basic rationale for why death is bad. That is, death is bad because it takes away future possible goods. If you die when you're 25 and you had future possible goods, then death is bad for you because it represents a loss of those goods. If you die when you're 806, if you can conceive of that, but there were possible goods in the future that would have occurred for you had you not died, then of course it's bad for you. Now, he struggles with the idea of whether there's a natural lifespan and our natural idea that the younger you die, the worse it is for you. But those are unresolved questions, I would say, in his essay.